My name is Michelle. I'm a high school student. For science, our teacher asked us to do an assignment on anything we want to, as long as we take an investigative approach. So I've decided on my project. It's going to be something extraordinary. Something my teacher won't expect. So why is the subject judged so harshly? The topic of UFOs is a discussion that is met with resistance and ridicule. Bring it up at a dinner table and the reaction is generally an unpleasant one. So why is this subject judged so harshly? Is it because of our disbelief in a superior alien culture? Or the idea of interstellar space travel sounds like something from a science fiction novel? In contrast to the skepticism, there are still many who take the UFO phenomena seriously. Knowing what makes these enthusiasts tick seems like a good place to start. But first, I want to know what to look for. How will I identify the smoking gun? Retired lawyer Victor Zammit explains the types of evidence I should be looking for.
Where, when, how, and why. Sometimes we cannot answer why. For example, if we're examining a murder case, well, we actually go to the venue itself. We see, we examine where the people concerned were at the time. We want to know exactly what happened, the cause and effect situation. But very, very important and very critical is the evidence. The evidence can be objective and it can be subjective. The more objective the evidence, the stronger the case. When I was doing, for example, workers' compensation commission, and I had to work for clients who were injured at work. Now, if the injuries sustained could be independently substantiated, like X-rays, for example, to show that the clients had problems with his bones at the back, lower back somewhere, we can surely independently substantiate our claims. If we only had subjective evidence, then we don't have a strong argument at all. So there is a difference between hardcore, objective, repeatable evidence and subjective evidence, which is personal evidence. But having said that, even with subjective evidence, make sure that the evidence presented is given fair and honest appraisal, no matter how strange the argument is.
To start my investigation, I have to look for the right case. As Victor Zammit explained, as long as the claims are supported by good evidence, I should not be dissuaded by its extraordinary nature. And it appears that I have my first lead. Meet Laszlo Novak, a retired carpenter who spends most of his time, well, not at the races or at the local RSL club, but on top of his roof. Armed with his small arsenal of cameras, Laszlo searches the skies for UFOs. His obsession for close encounters is shared with his fellow UFO hunter, Paul Ilhan. Together they discuss their experiences while scanning the heavens in a collective effort to capture hard evidence. And I can assure you that they are not alone. Millions of YouTube viewers from around the world visit Laszlo's and Paul's channel every year. Before I began my interview with Laszlo, I caught up with Paul to find the source of his obsession with UFOs.
Since when I was a little kid, I always want to find out about the UFOs and where they're coming from, and every day I find something about them. It's really mind blowing things, you know. It's become more than a hobby for me now. I like to record them nearly every day if I can with my camera, special camera. Yeah, I got a lot of video recordings on the YouTube and on my Facebook.
Paul, do you go to the same extremities as Laszlo does?
Yes, I do, even maybe more. Nearly every day, at least 3-4 hours I'm on the net, especially the YouTube, and checking out all the people's recording all around the world. I want to know more about them, what they can do, and why they're doing it, and why they're coming here.
You turn off the main camera. Why?
I'm doing a high school project that is anything but ordinary. After getting some investigative advice from retired attorney Victor Zamet, I found a case that may offer good evidence. UFO hunters Laszlo Novak and Paul Ilhan are determined to film anything weird in the skies just outside of Sydney. After understanding the motivation behind Paul's obsession, I then began my interview with Laszlo Novak to hear his stories of close encounters.
I do believe them. They exist. I saw them. I feel like a part of them. It was very certain experience. I do always watch the sky. The 5th of June, I got a dinner party with my friend. Just we go out to get some drink from the shopping center, and way back home I saw a big soccer ball size object under the sky, under the cloud, and we stop a car and we look at him, and just we went back home. After that, when we finished the dinner party, my wife, she stepped out from my house and she saw 3 objects under each other. I run back, I pick up a camera and then start to filming. And this time, it's already moved the position, triangular position, and they one by one disappeared.
Ray, did you see him? That's a UFO. That's exactly the same what I saw before, 2 hours ago.
After hearing about Laszlo's first 2 encounters, driving home from the shops, seeing a weird ball of light in the sky, discussing the experience with friends at a dinner party, only to have more weird lights appear in the sky, I can see how these sightings were a lead up to something more dramatic. As Laszlo showed me where the encounter took place, I could sense a genuine element of fear in him. I knew there was more to his UFO story, something dark. Obviously, something else happened that night on the 5th of June 1999 that still has Laszlo spooked. Before I continued the interview, I decided to take on an unconventional approach to my investigation. I asked psychic Nick Hume, who has no interest in the UFO phenomenon and most importantly knows nothing about Laszlo Novak or his encounters, to accompany me at a possible crime scene.
Being a psychic, it's more about making yourself aware to energies that are around you and picking up on what feelings you get from those energies and then learning how to interpret those.
Nick, something profound happened here over 10 years ago. Can you tell me if you can pick up on anything?
So a group of people, there was a car around, or a car that was involved. When you're standing on the corner, it's like there was a person that was just a little bit further back. He's seen something, and then he's come up a little bit further, then it's happened again. But that's when the car's come up the street and he's hailed that car down. I think there was, the 2 events that I think happened were 2 beams of light, not 1 beam of light, 2 beams of light.
I'm doing a high school project on UFOs. After getting some investigative advice from retired attorney Victor Zamet, I travelled to southwestern Sydney, where avid UFO hunter Laszlo Novak claims to have had multiple encounters, one of which still haunts him to this day. Psychic Nick Hume, who came to the scene, sensed that
a person that was just a little bit further back, he's seen something, 2 beams of light, not 1 beam of light, 2 beams of light.
After much deliberation, Laszlo Novak finally agreed to share the missing piece of his 5th of June 1999 close encounter. Will it somehow relate to the psychic story? I was about to find out.
When I went outside, because it was in my mind, I saw twice on this day, 6 o'clock 1 and 9 o'clock 3. Maybe when I go outside again, maybe I can see again something. This time it was 10 o'clock. The street, it was noisy, dog barking, children screaming on the street, and I heard like a big cannon fire. Just everything stopped. No children noise, no cars, no dog barking, nothing. 3 large objects just appearing above me. I tried to get it on a camera. I started filming, and my camera was just malfunctioned. And I run, and I tried to filming, and I saw only one object. 2, it's just went far away, and only one, it was very near to me.
Although I was able to visit the site with Laszlo, I was starting to doubt his extraordinary claim. How could 3 large UFOs slowly cruise over a residential area without anyone else noticing it? And then I had a breakthrough. A second eyewitness.
Would have been about probably 9, 10 o'clock at night. Clear sky, a few stars about, and there was just 3 glowing like lights, orange glow. I ran across, they took off in a south direction, like constant moving.
Did you hear anything at all?
No sound, no.
It wasn't until after my interview with Lee did I find out about the hidden tapes. Days after the encounter, Laszlo interviewed a 3rd and 4th eyewitness. Following retired attorney Victor Zammed's advice, the evidence supporting Laszlo's extreme claim was slowly stacking up. But where did these witnesses come from?
Just I saw one car come towards me. I tried to stop him, and they don't want to stop, and just I point them in the sky, look. The car just went down to the street, and they just came back, turned back, and they stopped a car in the middle of the road, and everybody stepped out.
I saw Les outside there with a video camera, and Les ran to our car and pointed up into the sky.
And when we looked up into the sky, we saw these 3 lights. I said to the driver, drive on, don't stop.
But when I looked up into the sky, I saw these terrible lights, these huge lights, 3 big objects up in the sky.
It was a very large object, very large UFO, very near to us. And lights, it was spinning around the edge of the craft.
And we stopped on the other corner and got out of the car. Oh my goodness, what's that we are seeing? I am looking at a flying saucer. I started feeling scared.
2 UFO, it went towards Wollongong, and they're waiting for that last one. I think that was the mothership.
It slowly moved towards the other 2 further on, and they formed like a triangle pattern.
And one by one went into that big one and just shot up in the sky and disappeared.
It was a very frightening experience too, because we didn't know what's going to happen, whether they are coming back or not.
4 independent witnesses had testified that 3 large flying objects of an unconventional nature did appear in the skies above southwestern Sydney on 5th of June 1999. But the story didn't end here. Just when I thought that this case couldn't get any stranger, it did. Yet according to Laszlo, the entire encounter from the Big Bang, weird lights in the sky, approaching car, a weird object in the sky, more witnesses followed by the grand disappearing act, lasted no more than 10 to 15 minutes.
When I started on filming, it was 10 o'clock. Until that's everything is just disappearing. That was 27 past 11.
Missing time. I recalled my conversation with retired attorney Victor Zammit.
For example, if we're examining a murder case, we examine the people concerned were at the time. We want to know exactly what happened, the cause and effect situation. Now, how do I go about doing that? Well, I called in an expert.
I had to bring in the experts. After his experience, Lazo approached hypnotherapist Frank Wilkes. Frank told me that he had dealt with many similar cases where missing time was a concern. Was this going to add a whole new dimension to Laszlo's close encounter?
Initially, with Laszlo, it was difficult to get him past the fear barrier. He just couldn't do it. We couldn't go anywhere. Deep asleep, just letting everything go. And so I stopped the session and I had a talk with him about what this was about and the fact that it was no longer real. And when we had him back in a better frame of mind, we began again. Visually recall. And he got into a very terrifying space.
I don't know. I can't say anything. I think this was I don't know. I have no idea what he's going to do.
Where something was happening to him, he knew something was happening to his body.
Like a fly, but I have no
So you described the fly.
I don't know. I can't say anything.
We knew that it was scary. It was someone was touching him and doing things to him in some way.
I feel like I'm on a table.
You feel like you're on a table?
I don't know. They did something again.
They did
I have no idea what.
These very strange creatures, and he was totally terrified. He was crying.
What are they doing then? It's just I want to catch the camera then.
There were beings, I think he called them like gnomes, and so those strange beings like that who were doing something to him, and from his position, lying down, he couldn't see what that was.
I want to know what they look like inside and what they creature was. I don't know. And I want to know. And I don't want to do anything about it today.
From what we know about Laszlo, it turned out to be more than an hour that he had of lost time while this happened. Well, can you speak to them and ask what they're doing, why you're there?
I'm scared.
I realise that.
I'm scared to ask. It's that they don't want to hurt me.
They don't want to hurt you.
It's just too excited.
I see.
I don't know. If that they could point a finger on me. It's a tall body. I don't know. I just want to examine you.
Okay, how did they tell you that? How did
They
they...
lift up a finger like that.
Okay,
To point on me. That's about it.
right.
It's just like a shadow. I don't know.
Did you hear a
They point
voice?
on me. No.
So there was a missing hour, not a few minutes in his life, where these beings had him and were investigating, experimenting, doing something with his body that terrified him.
I'm doing a high school project on UFOs. After getting some investigative advice from retired attorney Victor Zammit, I interviewed avid UFO hunter Lazo Novak, whose obsession was fueled by a dramatic close encounter on 5th of June 1999 in Sydney's southwest. After discovering 3 additional witnesses who also saw these UFOs, I learned that an entire hour was lost. Missing time. Hypnotherapist Frank Wilkes says that Lazo recalled a horrifying experience with aliens while under hypnosis. Before I close this chapter of my project, I had to interview one more expert, psychologist Dr. Tony Jinks. I was keen to hear his perspective on UFOs and extraterrestrial contact.
The psychological approaches that aren't mainstream but see the abduction scenario as perhaps more meaningful to the abductee tend to be called psychodynamic approaches. And in this approach we have our ego, our self-awareness, who we are as being an outside crust, and then within that we have a dynamic unconscious which we're not aware of. Its actions are autonomous. it acts alone, and sometimes in certain circumstances, in certain individuals, the actions of that autonomous deep psyche can break out and influence or be perceived by our conscious ego. And when our conscious ego experiences those kinds of actions of the unconscious, it doesn't attribute those actions to something from us. It attributes it to something external. Once upon a time, those kinds of experiences might have been attributed to the work of a devil. In a perhaps a more modern setting, it's attributed to the work of aliens from another planet. These approaches aren't considered terribly valid by psychologists. Nevertheless, they've achieved quite a degree of popularity because they seem intuitively interesting. They're not treating the abductee as some kind of patient who's suffering a mental disorder, but they're looking at it as a form of growth.
In light of his only evidence, a memory recollection during hypnosis, Laszlo's abduction experience remains inconclusive. Yet, testimonials of 4 independent witnesses strongly suggest that strange lights did appear above the skies in southwestern Sydney. So, is this an isolated case, or do these encounters appear more frequently than we care to admit? During my initial inquiries, I bumped into another case in Sydney's northern beaches. The date, 7th of April 2001, almost 2 years after the Novak incident.
Well, I was in bed and there was too much light and I couldn't sleep. And I just got up to close the curtains a bit, and as I did, I noticed 2 orange balls arcing up from left to right, above the treetops directly opposite. They all just started arcing from the left to the right, and there was a whole lot of them, and they were just floating very, very slowly across that way through the tops of the trees, and they just looked like you were watching an underwater scene, just floating underwater. And then they started to rise, and the top ones were going up very quickly and becoming dimmer and small, and the bottom ones were still full size. And you could see that the ones at the top was like a triangle, so that must have been 3. And the ones beneath it looked like the Southern Cross. And at that stage I was able to count them, and there were 7. I noticed another one that came zooming in from the left, and it was when that one joined in, as it joined the bottom of it, the one on that left-hand side moved over to the right, the one on the right went over to the left, and they all started changing places. And then it just, with intense speed, just went right up. They just looked like stars in the sky. It happened so quickly. There was a couple of articles in the Manly Daily, and that's how I came to contact Attila.
The name of the researcher Pem was referring to, well, happens to me, my dad. He told me that a large number of UFO sightings were reported around Sydney that year in 2001, something ufologists refer to as a flap.
In 2001, I was running a UFO organisation at the time, and we received a large number of reported sightings coming from Sydney's northern beaches. And the reports were so many that a colleague and myself decided to visit Sydney's northern beaches and to assess and find out what people were experiencing. Around 6 o'clock in the evening, we decided to venture to a place called Long Reef in Collaroy. It wasn't until just past 8 o'clock we noticed this orange light. It was heading from the ocean, and it was slowly cruising towards inland, and it would just stop just before the coast, and it would just sit there and hover there and then submerge into the ocean. As it did, we could actually see at one point the flash of light under the water as it cruised. And then shortly after, we saw this light again coming in from this, but this time it was heading towards us, and it was like an aeroplane flying low with its lights on, glaring at us. And then it would just stop and sit there. So then I trained my telescope onto this light, and what I saw was nothing I'd ever expected to see in my entire life. It was like a propeller. It was just sitting there in the sky on a 45-degree angle, slowly rotating. It was just no noise whatsoever. We were completely, shocked. We just didn't know what to do. We didn't know what we were dealing with. I quickly got up and ran straight towards it. I was heading straight towards the other side of the long reef. And as I did, this thing just flashed and it was gone. Almost disappeared. It was sitting out in the ocean, miles away from the shore, within a second. And we sat there and watched this glowing orange light out in the distance. And then something else happened. A beam of light just shot up from it into the sky. And then within seconds, another light, but this time it came from the sky from some unknown source. We didn't know what the hell was going on. It was like some form of communication was taking place. All of a sudden, these helicopters just appeared from nowhere. But we couldn't physically see the helicopters, but we could see the searchlights. Wherever you turned your head, you could hear these helicopters everywhere, but you could not see them, only when they had their spotlights. Naturally, we decided to get out of the open and take cover because we had no idea if we were going to be in any trouble or not. We didn't know if we were supposed to see what we were seeing. It was slightly intimidating, to say the least. This was almost something out of a fiction novel. I mean, you just... How do you respond to something like this?
Helicopters. So there has to be an official awareness for these UFO encounters. Perusing through my father's archives, I found a report with an attached newspaper article of another strange light in the sky that allegedly crashed on the 16th of June 2004 in the Lake Cataract Reserve area. Apparently the crash site was then cordoned off by the military. Was this a training exercise that went horribly wrong, or was it another Roswell incident? To find an official explanation about these unidentified flying objects, I contacted the defence media to arrange an interview with a representative. The response: an epic fail. People are having these strange experiences, yet the officials seem to be turning a blind eye. Alien or not, I felt that it's only fair to give the citizens an explanation. And then I discovered something that might just cater for these questions. The National Australian Archives in Canberra.
The National Archives is a custodian of all the Commonwealth Government agency files that are perceived to be of permanent value. I have collected around about 39 million files. We have a lot of UFO sightings in our collection, and they're not all gathered in the one place. During the 20th century, there was never one place where Australians could write in and report that they'd seen a UFO. So if they wanted to report, if they'd seen something strange and they wanted to report it, there were lots of different places that they would report that. A lot of them ended up in the RAF files. I know, for example, that there are around about 35 different files just full of reports from about the mid-1950s through to the 70s and 80s. But they end up in all sorts of strange places. For example, people sometimes wrote to the Prime Minister if they saw a UFO and wanted to report it. But then other people, other government departments just had a little internal investigation. And you'll find UFO reports filed under strange things like miscellaneous files. So for example, there was a UFO sighting in the 1960s when the Marilingo nuclear testing. It was seen by a lot of people, and the scientists there wanted to have an investigation into what had actually happened and take eyewitness accounts, and that was quietly filed under miscellaneous, because where else do you put a UFO sighting? Most of the files that I know of that we have in our collection are actually open for public viewing. In fact, most of them have been digitised and put up on our collection database record search. So anybody sitting at home on the computer can come to our website and do a search for UFOs or any related term like flying saucers, and they'll find a wealth of information about UFO sightings around Australia.
I'm doing a high school project on UFOs. Receiving advice from retired attorney Victor Zammit and psychologist Dr. Tony Jinks, it gave me a crucial insight into the UFO and abduction phenomena and the approach I should be taking. After looking into 3 weird cases, my inquiries then led me to the National Australian Archives in Canberra, where I found a wealth of UFO reports ranging from civilian to non-civilian. It was after my trip to Canberra when I got my next lead, my 4th case, a commercial pilot.
My experience was in 1992. It was evening. We were taxiing out of Sydney for Brisbane. I'm a first officer at the time on the 737. We just about got to our cruising altitude. We were just past the Hunter Valley. We could see a very, very bright object in the distance, extremely bright. And the captain and myself, we were watching the object, and no sooner were we discussing the object, we could hear a aircraft in front of us. The pilots were talking to air traffic control about the object, and their comments was the object was heading fairly close to their aircraft. It went under their aircraft, and that's when we took a lot more notice because the object was getting quite bright. But at the same time, there was a airlines jet, and the pilots in that aircraft were very, very concerned. They actually thought the object was heading towards them. And this object was so bright that it was worrying all of us because it gave us that perception that we were on a collision course. I was talking to air traffic control. The airlines jet was talking to air traffic control. The jet was talking to air traffic control. And we were all very, very concerned because the object looked very, very close. After a few minutes of everyone talking and making comments, and we were making comments that we don't usually make when we're talking to air traffic control, but at the time, well, we were discussing the object. Nobody has a personal discussion over the control frequency. It's pretty important that aircraft only receive headings and altitudes and air traffic control instructions, but even air traffic control were quite interested in what we were talking about. Unbeknown to us at the time, air traffic control was tracking the object, and at a later time that evening when I spoke to the area centre controller, he confirmed with me that the object must have been doing close to 4,000 miles per hour. The interesting thing was the object broke away from its heading. It turned right, which at that time meant that the object was turning left, but from our perspective it was turning right from the direction of our aircraft, and the object actually climbed rapidly. It was just incredible. Never seen anything like it. The object, at first we thought it was just climbing to a higher altitude, but the object, it went so fast, it broke or formed into 3 objects, but it climbed extremely high, and from what we could tell, it sat in geostationary orbit. We could see the 3 objects, and they looked just like stars. And these 3 little objects we watched for about 20 minutes to 30 minutes. And even when we were descending into cloud, these 3 objects were still just sitting up there in the sky, and they just looked like stars. But we all saw the main object break up into 3 objects, but these objects climbed and they were fast.
All these credible witnesses, yet still no smoking gun. Because of the absence of hard evidence, most would consider these stories too incredible to believe. So where does this leave my project? I had to find another avenue. So I began searching for a civilian group who have dealt with matters of a close encounter kind. Members of the Sydney-based UFO Research New South Wales Incorporated explain their involvement with the UFO phenomena. What's the main reason behind your passion for it? What got you really passionate about this subject?
I became interested in this phenomenon many, many years ago. I'm very curious about the abduction phenomenon, the contact with ETs particularly. My passion is to promote an awareness within the public of the UFO phenomenon. Not only that, the fact that there is contact going on and has been going on for a very long time. That we are not here alone in the middle of nowhere, as we are told.
My interest in the UFO field was very much the public's view of the UFO phenomenon. In around about 1992, I heard on the radio that there was a UFO conference happening in Sydney. So I went to the UFO conference, the first ever conference I'd gone to. There were members of the group of UFO Research New South Wales they had a stall and they were advertising a UFO investigators course. I learned a lot about Venus and scintillation and cloud formations and the tricks of the eye with planes coming head on at you and so on and so on. So I became very much aware of sorting the wheat from the chaff and how it's done, which was very valuable. And I then went on to become an investigator.
I have heard a lot of witness accounts of what ordinary people have seen, and to me those sorts of things are very fascinating to me, and it's an extreme fascination with space and aliens and all that type of thing being real as opposed to being science fiction.
Could you tell me, when someone comes to you with an experience, what do you do? Do you investigate it? Do you ask for an interview? How is it that you start with a case?
What happens sometimes, Hugh will pass these sighting reports or other reports of anomalous events to the group, and I tend to respond to the ones where people have had contact or had some really unusual experiences as part of their sighting report.
Reports come in through the internet and they come to my email box. So what I do is I broadcast it to all of our investigators for a start. So I send that email out to all the investigators. It might include things like photographs and images. But the bottom line is to try and put some sort of answer out to the person. So I give them the tools if someone else has got the same sighting, because a lot of people ask, have other people seen this? And if they do, then we can actually connect them together so that people can actually talk to each other.
Through collecting cases and investigating them, what is your opinion? What do you think is going on?
What we're looking at here is the genuine mystery, rather than UFOs, which are unidentified flying objects that may need more information to become IFOs, or identified flying objects. Or with more information they may go into another category of being a genuine mystery. It's the areas that in the genuine mystery is where our interest lies, because there is no hypothesis that explains these conditions, that suits the facts of what people are telling us. So what we're dealing with is, in a sense, a mystery, and when you have a mystery you come up with an hypothesis, and the advanced technology visitation hypothesis is the best fit.
My high school project in UFOs is almost complete. The advice and reports on close encounters have given me a wealth of information, but I'm nowhere closer to solving the mystery. If these UFOs are in fact a form of transportation, I had to know about the bridge between them and us. Space.
I got into astronomy at a very, very young age, at about the age of 3. My mum said that I was always outside at night with her and pointing at the moon, and I was always fascinated by the moon.
I listen to scientists, I listen to people I trust about their ideas on the cosmos, what makes it, what made it. I think it's fairly finite. I think I believe in the Big Bang Theory. I believe that the science is good enough to be able to decompile what we have now and wind it back.
What is your theory of life in the universe?
I feel that there is life in the universe, varying life. It doesn't necessarily have to be carbon-based, but are aliens visiting us on Earth? I think that I can probably say no to that question.
I don't think that there is much chance out there of other life. I don't think that it would ever reach us.
Simply because the vastness of space would not allow people to travel over the light years, millions of light years, to come to our world.
The extrasolar planets I find fascinating, especially when the new generation of telescopes can take a spectra of the atmosphere of these planets, and if we detect molecules of oxygen or water, then the chances of life being on that planet look pretty good, very promising.
But is there life similar to ours, more advanced than ours? I believe there is.
Yes, I believe there is some form of life out there.
If there is a good chance that intelligent life could exist elsewhere in the universe, but the distances are too great to travel, then who or what are piloting these UFOs? Theories are certainly plentiful. It seems the more I dig for information, the more confusing it gets. There was only one thing left for me to do, and that was to see a UFO for myself. For this, I travelled to Sydney's Blue Mountains, one of the claimed hotspots for UFO activity. Will I find the answers here? Tonight I'm conducting a night watch up here at the Blue Mountains. It's freezing cold, and so we've got a very excellent vantage point up here, which is crucial for a night watch, and you can practically see everything from up here. We have full moon tonight, and my telescope's pointed at the moon at the moment, but I'm looking around to see if there's, just in case anything happens. This place in particular is a UFO hotspot, and I've been here for 2 hours now and nothing has shown up as of yet, but because it's got such a reputation, I'm waiting patiently. Yes! What the hell is that? I'm currently looking towards Mount Solitary through the telescope, and through the scope I can see this red dot on the horizon, and it seems to be coming up slowly and then back down behind the mountain again. It's a little bit weird. It's still there, and it's a little higher up than it was before. Wow, that is so weird. Well, it actually is gone. Okay, I just had another look, and it seems to have disappeared. It's gone. During the course of my project, I seem to have generated more questions than answers, but I did gain a lot of knowledge. How to conduct an investigation and to evaluate with a critical mindset, how hypnosis is used to recollect memories, why some people support the contact theory, and why some don't. I had a chance to view some official reports, as well as interview eyewitnesses and engage a psychic. In conclusion, well, there really isn't any. Will we ever know the truth about UFOs? I think the truth resides in us all, through the experiences we encounter in life.